Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Nexus Insights, the podcast where we are focused on having authentic conversations with interesting people. I have my good friend, Mr. JW Allendorf, here as our guest. He is going to be sharing some insights from his very interesting life. I've gotten to know JW over the past couple of years, and the way we met, we'll kind of get into that here in just a little bit. But JW, thank you so much for being here. It's good to have you.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. And Miss Josie, thank you as well. I forgot to let everyone know you're here, but they can see that as well. So, but JW, again, thank you so much for coming. I think this is going to be great, and I'm really just excited to see where our conversation goes. As I was telling you, just over text and while we were talking off camera, I always like to start these podcasts just with an opportunity for people to share something that's been very impactful or made a positive difference. And so the question I'm going to ask you is the same question I ask everyone, is that if you could magically share a message with the world on something that has positively impacted your life or just made a key difference in the way that you've approached your life, what would that message be? And what would you like to share with everyone?
That's a message that's never left me since the age of 17 when I went in the Army. I was the youngest man in our basic training company and had a well-known drill sergeant, Malcolm Perry, a black man who grew up in a hard life and was extremely successful. And I didn't know all of these things just yet, but I knew he was going to be a special person in my life from the day that I met him. And he made a remark to me one-on-one in the orderly room when I had done something a bit out of line. And he looked me right in the eye and he said, "Never forget, Allendorf." That's how he said my last name. He didn't pronounce the R in my name. He said, "Allendorf, never forget that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who refuse to take a stand in times of moral crisis." I never forgot that, and I've remembered it many times when I was faced with situations that I felt met that need. And I tried to live out his advice.
That's super powerful. And you were 17 years old when you had this happen?
Yes.
So I want to dive into that, but I want to maybe back up and go into how you actually got into the Army, because, you joined at a time where the Vietnam conflict was going. Were you drafted or did you
No,
enlist?
I joined.
You enlisted? Okay.
1968.
Okay. And so, tell us about your, what led up to that. Who is JW as a young man? What was life like? Where'd you grow up? Just tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Okay. Yeah, I was a military brat. My father initially was in the Army, in the infantry in the Pacific, and he, on Tinian Island, when they were cooling their heels, taking a break, he got involved with some Army Air Corps guys that were doing some welding and plate repair on a runway that was being built. And as it turned out, he was pulled over from the Army into the Army Air Corps because of his metalworking skills. He was brought up by a blacksmith, and he was a natural with metal. And of course, they didn't have all the different technology at that time. But nonetheless, he ended up in the Air Force and became a commissioned on-the-spot second lieutenant from an E-7 sergeant.
Wow.
And he stayed in the military. He had no education to speak of, and stayed in the military and retired as a major and at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. Prior to that, we were stationed in Italy, Germany, a short weeks, months maybe in Austria, and about 2 years in Casablanca, Morocco.
Were you born here in the States, or were you?
I was born in Illinois at a air base there. What the heck was the name of that? It was shut down because it was such a hazmat site.
Oh, no.
I can't remember the name of it now. But I was born in the States and went immediately overseas, and came back to the States in, I believe it was 59. Vandenberg Air Force Base was not in existence when we moved there. We moved there to help bring it together, my father's job. And at that time, it was Camp Cook Army Hospital from World War II, a huge hospital complex for wounded and injured personnel. So I grew up there in the town of Lompoc in the central coast of California, called by many the Valley of Flowers. They raised flowers. Burpee was the big outfit. They raised flowers for seed that they distributed worldwide. And my neighbors, when I was a kid, were called braceros then. And they lived in like little barracks type places and worked in the fields. And I fell in with a bunch of those guys, and they got me a job working in the flower fields, and they grew beans there too.
How old were you when this was happening?
Oh, 12, 13 or so. There were no child labor laws.
Yeah.
And we were in the bean fields with a short hoe, and that's what we did, was we weeded, and there were adults out there with us. But, these were people that were just trying to make a living and do better, and I went to school with a lot of them, and they were my friends.
Mm-hmm. And so what was school like for you? Were you involved in sports, or what were you like as a kid at school?
I was not. Strangely enough, my father was a hell of an athlete. In fact, I still have somewhere in my catacombs in the garage, I have his contract from professional baseball.
Wow.
And he played semi-pro hockey in Canada, the Winnipeg Maroons. And his contract that was written in those days, 41, the contracts were 2 pages. And the contract that I have, that was his original, has a big X across it, and it just says void war. And it's dated the day Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Jeez.
That was it. That was the end of his baseball. But to answer your question, my athletics, I wanted to be an athlete, but it became my father crammed it down my throat. I mean, it was not fun. It became like punishment. Being the catcher, that was the position he played, and so it was kind of a rebellion thing. No, I was not an athlete because of that, and caused a great deal of friction between the two of us. And as I got older, it became physical, the friction. I didn't have a good relationship with my father at all. And I look at like you and Lincoln, and I think that's part of what I like so much about seeing the two of you together, is because that's something I never had. So.
Yeah, and because like I know for Lincoln and I mean, my dad and I are super close, and I know when he's talked about his relationship with my grandfather who's passed away, I call him my nano, my dad will talk from time to time about, the nano you got was not the father I had. He was like, nano was not the same way, because by the time he was a grandfather, he'd calmed down a ton and just wasn't doing all the wild and crazy things that, because he was in the Air Force, and, just my dad basically he was very physical with me, like to the point where it wasn't good. And they had a good relationship, I think, as he got older. But I think that was something that he was very big on with me as well, is that he saw the way that his dad was with him, and kind of that old school, very hands-on, you smack you around type of approach. Oh, yeah. And he never did that with me. He was always very stern. I'm dad, you're the son, this is the way, but like loving as well. And so I really try and do that with Lincoln as well, because I've seen that just the impact, like it's almost like in the Army, you can have, I had a squad leader, and I'm not going to say his name because, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, and we all do the best with what we have when we're there. But I had a squad leader when I was in the Ranger Regiment who basically took all the wind out of my sails because he was so hard on me. And I understand why he was doing it. This is a guy who grew up in the Iraq War, grew up, deploying every year, saw multiple of his friends get killed and, blown up. And I think he really was trying to impose on us very quickly how bad things got and make our life stressful, so we were used to that. But it had the opposite effect, where there would be times where you know how it is, like you show up in the Army as a private and sometimes you've just never done something, like you just don't know how to do it because no one's ever shown you. And I will never forget, one of my first live fire drills was a break contact drill, because I had kind of a unique situation when I went into the Ranger Regiment, in that I went straight to a reconnaissance platoon, which never happens, And so in the Ranger Regiment, typically what happens is you will have, 2-3 deployments. You'll be at least an E5. You'll have gone to Ranger school, and then you can try and get to a specialty unit like Recce or snipers or K9 or something like that. But they were so low on guys, they took some of us as Recce privates, and we were basically like, here, carry this radio and, do all the grunt work and just, how it is, private stuff. And so, I remember we were doing a live fire, and it was a break contact, because as a Recce platoon, you're not trying to fight anybody. If you make contact, you're typically trying to break contact as quickly as possible. And so we were setting up a claymore, and we were doing our day iteration. So in the Army, I don't know how it was for you, but for us, when I was in, we would do a day iteration with blanks, and then a day iteration with live fire. And then we do a night iteration, so it's all under nods with blanks, and then a night iteration with live fire. And so you got 4 reps every time you do something. And they were talking to all the E5s, the squad leaders, and the E6s. And they're like, okay, we're going to have you guys set up the claymores, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, we won't have any of the privates set up the claymores. And I was like, yeah, this is BS. I'm for sure somehow going to end up setting up a claymore. And I had just never done it before. Like, even in basic training, they have like a claymore they show you, but they don't really teach you anything. So I was like taking it, and then they use the acronym ATAR, aim, tie, arm, re-aim, So like, and then they showed us how to do it. And so sure enough, we're going through everything. We do all the iterations, and the last iteration, the night fire. So I'm under nods as a brand new private. It is my first training. It was my first live fire ever. They're like, Rob, you need to do the claymore. And I'm like, F my life. Of course, here we go, And so I'm trying to do it, and basically I don't know what's happening. And these guys just start getting in my face and screaming at me. So my platoon sergeant's yelling at me, my squad leader's yelling at me. And I just remember looking up, and I pop my nods up and go, Sergeant, I've never touched a claymore before. I don't know how it works. And like, he just looked at me like, kind of like, oh my gosh. But then my platoon sergeant, like, he went from like being angry to like, all right, private, let's do this right. And he kind of helped me, but my squad leader would just yell at me and would just like berate me. And it just like, it took all the wind out of my sails, to where I went from being like willing to try to scared to make a mistake, And so I've tried with Lincoln to like give him that stern, hey, this is going to be it. But as soon as it's like getting elevated, it's like, all right, let's dial it back. Let's think this through, And so
that's good.
Yeah. And so for you, like going to school, were you good at school, or what was school like for you?
I could have been. I was not. I failed miserably mathematics. I could never put it together until I was older.
Okay.
I excelled in English and history. And, well, let me put it this way. In high school, I spent so much time, we had a dean of discipline, Richard, I called him Dick Graining. And his secretary actually crocheted a seat cover for me for outside his office, because they would always call if you were going to the office. Mm-hmm. And she'd have it out there, and it said John.
Oh, gosh.
And so no, I was a pretty wild kid, and to the point that people in the school called my wife's parents to let her know, hey, you really don't need your daughter hanging around with this character.
And how old were you when this happened?
Well, let's see. Donna was in the 8th grade. I was in the 9th when I first, and then we went all through school together. I graduated 2 years ahead of her. So.
Yeah, and you were telling the story before off camera about kind of how you met Donna and just
Oh,
what that was
yeah.
like. Yeah, why don't you share with that? Just because I know Josie didn't get to hear, and that way you could talk about that.
Well, one of my buddies, Eddie Snyder, he was a good guy. He and I spent a lot of time together, and we were walking home from school, and we split up at a certain point. And we got to that point. He goes, "Hey, you want to go over to Donna's with me?" And I said, "Donna who?" And he said, "Donna Kokoska." And I said, "Is she the blonde with the braces?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Yeah, I'll go." Anyway, I didn't know what we were going to do there. Turned out it was a good place to stop after school because in our house and in Eddie's too, we didn't have all kinds of goodies, chips and Cokes and sodas and all that kind of stuff. And we went to her house and sat down in the kitchen. Her mom was scurrying around mixing up dip, and she opened the cupboards, and I looked up there and I saw ding-dongs and Twinkies, and I was going, hallelujah, this is a gold mine. Anyway, so several weeks later, Eddie and I went there again with Eddie. And then several weeks later, on the way home, he goes, "Hey, you want to go by Donna's?" I said, "That's where I'm heading, Eddie." And he goes, "Oh, good." And I said, "But you're not coming." And so that was it.
How did he take
but
that?
Eddie and I still stayed friends.
Yeah, I was going to say, how does he?
Well,
he
he was a little bum-fuzzled. But, you know, I didn't see any point in beating around the bush. Never have. So.
And so, like, with you and Donna then, like, when did you start dating, and what did that look like for you guys?
Pretty much then. I mean, we had to get rides to the dances. You know, they always had, like in the town, they had the hop at the Veterans Hall every Friday night. And the schools had dances, junior high and high school. But if we went anywhere, and it was always her mom would drive us in this big old boat. With push button transmission on the dash, and yeah, neither one of us was driving age.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm sorry, where was this at again? Like where
Vandenberg Air Force Base and
Okay.
and Lompoc was the town.
Okay. And so you guys basically high school sweethearts. It sounds like.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow.
All through high school, and I mean it was like typical kids, on again, off again, that kind of thing, but more on than off.
Right.
And then when I graduated and went in the Army, I'm proud to say and thankful, while I was overseas, even though we didn't get mail all the time, but when we got it, we got it. And there was a letter for almost every day from Donna.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, and really kept me going.
Well, and I feel like being married too for that long, it's probably taught you a lot with everything that you guys have been through. Like, what's one thing that you wish that other people would know? Because not a lot of people get married to their high school sweethearts, and not a lot of people stay married to them.
Yeah.
I think dedication plays into it. I felt dedicated to Donna. In Hawaii, in Vietnam, there were whorehouses everywhere, and guys went to the whorehouses when they could. I didn't want anything to do with any of that kind of stuff, and for one thing, I didn't want to catch some disease and later in life give it to my wife.
It can be hard to explain.
Yeah, well, and not just that, but But anyway, dedication, I think, and caring about someone. I mean, that's an important part of it, that you truly care, and I did. And I felt like she did too. Everything indicated that to me.
And I'm curious too, because obviously we've got to know each other, just becoming friends, but then also working together, just you guys with being clients of ours. And, I've seen, because you and Donna don't always see things eye to eye, like no married couple ever does. And so what do you say to people? Because I feel like that's something that in our I say our, but my generation, Josie's, a generation essentially younger than me. But so many people now, like myself included, I was married and then I was divorced and I've remarried and, very happily married, but I don't, what do you think is the difference because you said you've been married over 50 years now, right?
It'll be 54 on July 1st.
How old were you guys when you got married?
Let's see, Donna was 19. I had just turned 21.
Okay.
Or no, she would have been 20, and I was 21.
Okay, and so,
Yeah.
I mean,
when I came home, I couldn't even buy a beer because I was 19 when I got back from Vietnam.
that's insane.
Or no, I just turned 20.
Okay.
So I couldn't go in and sit down and have a beer.
Yeah, you can go deploy, you can go fight, but you can't buy a beer. We talked about that too when I was in the Army. But yeah, so you got married then after getting back from Vietnam, it sounds like.
Yes, and I had a really rough time adjusting when I got back. It was a bumpy time, and I know Donna was really scared for me because I was, when I came home, there was a lot of anti-war things going on, and I wasn't prepared for it. You came home as individuals. You didn't go as a unit. Mm-hmm. And so you just got on the plane and Ponsanut, I went into San Francisco or Oakland, and there were people there to greet us, that called us baby killers and all these kind of things. And it just really set me back, and I was looking for an escape, and I had nowhere to live. My father picked me up in Oakland, and he walked by me twice without recognizing me. And that alone was kind of just shocking, And then the ride home, he had been in combat, so he didn't try to dig too much. And it was just a really quiet ride, like 4 hours. And I got home, and I ran into a guy at the local store, and he goes, "Hey, why don't you come? We're having a party at so-and-so's house." And I went there, and I just felt like a total outsider.
Yep.
I couldn't relate to anything. Their life had not changed since high school.
Yep.
And mine had been peaks and valleys and horrendous times. And I was an outsider, and I was very, very lonely. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And what I did was I ended up buying some equipment. I had my rucksack came back to me, so I had that. And I bought some good boots and stuff, and I went into the Vantana Wilderness near Hearst Castle and stayed in there for the better part of a month, just trying to sort things out. There really wasn't a lot of benefit from that other than just an escape, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. I was pretty distraught, but Donna stuck by me, and I called and we got together when I came out, and I don't know, things just kind of moved along slowly, and the fellow that became a very close friend to me when I left home at 16, Sheriff Kelly, Bill Kelly, he was a guy that found a place for me to live till I graduated from high school, and he had retired from Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department. He was a sergeant, and he opened a gun store, Pico's Gun Shop, and he hired me, and I think he only did it just to give me something, a focus. And all I did was clean guns that came in, traded, and took them apart and cleaned them and that kind of thing. And he paid me better than he should have. And I ended up in an apartment with 3 other infantry veterans, and that turned into a zoo.
Yeah, that had to be a little rowdy.
It wasn't just rowdy, but these guys were dope smokers, and I was trying to go to school at night, and they would be partying, and I just couldn't take it. So I And then I got a job working at Vandenberg Air Force Base at a tracking station, graveyards. And it was a really isolated place right on the coast, the tracking station. I didn't have a car or anything, so I paid a guy that I worked with to pick me up at a certain place, and I rode with him. Anyway, yeah, it was strange times, you know, in my life. It was probably the roughest part of my life, was making that adjustment and getting back in step with the rest of the world. You know, I was totally out of step with anybody my age.
What you're describing, we talked about just recently on I think one of our last episodes, is that, so I have a friend of mine who was talking about, and it sounds like you went through something similar, but I guess there were studies that showed that guys who came back from like wars like, you know, World War II, for example, they would come back on boats. And so they'd have time to decompress and to talk, and they'd sit there and talk with their friends and talk to people who'd been there and done that.
And I've been through some pretty heavy-duty PTSD and alcohol counseling. Mm-hmm. And that was one thing that was brought up to me by the counselor, is lacking that unity truly as a unit, and being together with people that you suffered with and lost and that kind of thing. And then just being thrown out as an individual was one of the big causes of PTSD.
Well, and I know my grandpa, he was in the Vietnam War, so he went over there and he came back, and still to this day, I think every Friday he goes and gets breakfast with all of his vet buddies, and I think a lot of them have passed away, but he did that for years and years and years, and I think that helped him a ton as well.
Yeah.
Just having that community.
Yeah, and you know, one thing along with that, and that's a big thing for my life right now, is I belong to the VFW. It's a group in Victor, and they're just really good, all different age groups, and we all have something in common. We have a common grounding wire, if you will, and that's important. And something else that I found myself getting involved in was driving veterans to doctor's appointments. And
that's cool.
Picking them up, and I've always said you never have to look too far to see how lucky you are. And I saw it with those guys. There was one guy I picked up from the hospital at St. Pat's, and I said, well, where do you live? And he said, the Poverello. And I'd never been close. I'd been by it 1,000 times. But he only had one little bag of things, and I drove him into the back parking lot there, and there was all these poor people, you know, that drug addicted and, you know, talking to themselves and everything else. And I said, man, it really hurt to drop him off there, you know. But I don't know how I got down that road. But.
Well, I mean, we were just talking about, too, like, just because I know for myself, I had a similar experience to you coming home from Afghanistan, where we left Afghanistan. For us, you know, we'd be on these military jets where you could roll out your sleeping bag, you know, you could go to sleep. And so they would give us Ambien so that you could fall asleep. And normally you would go to Germany, you'd stay there for, you know, a couple hours, a couple days. You just waited until you got the next flight, and then we'd come back stateside. Well, for us, I went to bed in Afghanistan, and then literally, like, we got an in-air refuel, and so I woke up as we were descending and landing in Washington State. And so I went to bed in Afghanistan, and I woke up in Washington.
Oh my God!
Yeah, and I do. It's exactly what you're describing. I remember. And now, granted, we didn't have, you know, I didn't have to deal with the protesters or any of that stuff. But, you know, like, coming back, it's like you get off the plane and they say, all right, you have 2 weeks to leave. Like, let's, you know, you do something, you kick around the, you know, the compound for a little bit, and then you're off for 2 weeks. It's like, all right, go back to your family, be normal, you know, go integrate with everybody, and, you know, just don't worry about all this other stuff that was just happening, you know, days ago. It's just like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to be normal. And it would be things where you'd see guys who would just get into so much trouble. And I'm thinking of guys specifically who, You know, there's one guy I knew who was just such a squared away dude. He came back from his deployment and just something was off, and then he got super heavy into drugs and started like doing all sorts of stuff and got picked up on some type of like robbery charge and just like was really weird stuff, you know, because like he didn't know how to turn it off and get back into the integration of just normal society. And so like, what would you say to vets out there? Because you're in a stage where you've had years to like kind of figure things out, and it sounds like you've done counseling. It sounds like you've, you know, gotten some help where you needed it. What would you say to that younger generation of soldier out there who maybe is, you know, just starting to figure out how to cope with what they've done or seen or been through? What would your advice be to them?
Well, I think, and Donna kind of helped me with this, is have faith in yourself. Don't give up on yourself. Because I dipped into that water, and Donna was the one that kind of pulled me out of there. And not intentionally, just by her presence and love.
And when you're talking about faith in yourself, in what regard are you meaning?
Well, that you can do things, you can make things better for yourself.
And are you like, are you speaking mentally or like physically, where people are coming back and they're not sure what they want to do for work or for anything like that?
Could you say that again?
Are you talking mentally, so if for depression and stuff like that, or are you talking more for like a career path or physical things?
No, initially mentally.
Okay.
Pulling yourself together, because very honestly, in the first year and a half or so for me, there was no career path because my shit was so scattered. I didn't have my act together. I didn't know where I was going, what I was going to do. And just by the grace of God, and I'll never forget this, one of the guys that I served with, and he went home earlier, he got a hold of me, and I was working at that radar station or tracking station. It was the most boring job in the world. And all the people there thought I was really strange because it was up on this mountain peak overlooking the Pacific. And we worked graveyards, and so lunch was like at 4 in the morning, 3:30 or 4. And I would go outside and sit in the parking lot on the parking curbs, just listening. You could hear the ocean in the distance. And everybody else was hunkered around BSing in the coffee room. But I wanted to be outside. I didn't want to be contained. And so this buddy of mine calls me up and he goes, "Hey, what are you doing?" I told him. He says, "Do you like your job?" I said, "God, I hate it. It's boring as hell." And he said, "Well, you still have your web gear, the gear that we wore?" And I go, "Oh, yeah." He says, "You ever put it on?" I said, "Yeah, I do, as a matter of fact." And I keep my canteens full. And he said, "You want a job where you can wear that again?" And I said, "I'm not going back over there." And he says, No, this is with the Forest Service fighting fire." I said, "Really?" Anyway, that's how I got in the Forest Service. I said, "Well, what do I do?" He says, "Why don't you," and Don and I at this time, I think, we had just married. And that's a story in itself. But we drove over to Fraser Park, which is off of Interstate 5 in California and out in the sticks a little ways. And I met the fire control officer at the ranger station. He was an old Marine from Korea, Al Solario. And we sat down and talked, and he says, I think you'd be a good prospect. And he says, "I want you to fill out this 171 form," which was an employment application, and you put down your past and experience and stuff. And he kind of shoved it across his desk at me, and I reached for it, and he pulled it back, and he goes, "But," he says, "you need to go down to Lake of the Woods and see Charlie and get a haircut." And my hair wasn't much longer than yours. And so he pulled that 171 back, and my buddy Eddie took me down to the barber shop. And I got her pretty well skinned off. I had a little bit on top. And I went back, and he goes, okay, fill it out.
So, yeah, and I know I'm very curious to hear about, what you did, in the Forest Services. I know you did it for a long time. Let's back up, though, a little bit. So, because I know, obviously the military shaped you in a huge way. So, talk us through when you joined. Did you join, what was your MOS when you went into?
11 Bravo.
So you were an infantryman, okay. So
yeah. I had a secondary of 11 Delta, armored recon.
Okay.
Also.
And so did you tell us about what it was like when you joined? I mean, and then, because I know when we've talked before, just at the Ranger breakfast, you talked about how young you were and how you were kind of a buck sergeant and how things got.
Oh, yeah.
Just tell us, what that was like from.
Yeah, it was crazy. Well, Sergeant Perry, he rode me like a borrowed mule. I mean, he did. He was on my ass all the time. And never in a hostile way, just leaned hard. And I don't know if he thought he saw something or what, but when I graduated and left, I thought I was going straight to Vietnam. And they called not a bunch, but 4 or 5 of us out of a big ceremony and said, here's you guys' orders. And it was we called it shake and bake. It was the non-commissioned officer candidate course. You had one for armor, artillery, and infantry. And it was a 16-week program. It was an academy. 16-week program that you went through. I went to 11 Delta at Fort Knox. And when you went in, I was a E2 when I graduated from AIT. And then when I went to the NCO Academy, I was a corporal. And then if you successfully completed the training, the honor graduate from every class came out as an E6 staff sergeant.
Wow.
Yeah. Everybody else came out as 3-stripers. And the reason, and I asked, well, what are you going to do with all these sergeants? And they said, well, they're killing sergeants by the busloads. And I was like, oh, this is great. What a good deal.
Jeez.
Yeah, that was it. They wanted, because they had experienced, good people in the field, but they didn't have the training in adjusting artillery and map and compass and just a million different things, communications, and this went right down the line with all those things. And it was not an easy course. And 16 weeks, and then I had 30, well, no, I didn't have 30 days off. I think I had 18 days before I shipped out for Vietnam.
And then how long were you in Vietnam for?
A year and about a month. We took some real heavy losses. Actually, all the teams went out on a aircraft down, and we lost a lot of guys. The NVA it was in a NVA area, and they shot the aircraft down and they put in a 105 round booby trap. And we were running through the jungle to get to the pilots. And again, by the grace of God, I had tail squad, but we lost 18 guys in that.
With your guys' the capacity you were serving in, was this a platoon size element you were going around in?
Yeah, actually, it was a dual purpose unit. It was long range recon. There were not, to be on a long range recon team, you had to have been through the Recondo school. We didn't have everybody through that. We were authorized a total of 48 people. And they wanted to have 6 full teams, and the team was 8. So you went with 5 out, but you had
One in reserve.
Yeah. Anyway, we also did what they called the Aero Rifle Platoon, which was pilot rescue. And the 11th Cav, when it came to Vietnam, was led by Colonel Patton. And he was just like his grandfather. And he was an old bullshit guy, and he got things done one way or the other. But he didn't sacrifice people to do it. He did it with smarts. And he called the ARPS, the Aero Rifle Platoon, Patton's boys. He formed it, and then formed the Long Range Recon into that. But I forget, what was the question? I
was asking about how you guys operated a platoon size element or what?
Yeah. Well, we went out platoon size for pilot rescue, usually 6 ships with 6 apiece, and without rucks, just lots of ammo.
So
because it was usually, what would happen is the armor would, they moved pretty well in that part of Vietnam, surprisingly well, even as heavy and everything as they were. But the Aero Scouts were constantly flying, and if they saw Viet Cong or NVA, and our primary was North Vietnamese in numbers, and if they saw them on the march or in a camp or anything, they'd throw red smoke, call artillery, and we'd fly, and we'd go in and make contact to fix the target while the armor moved in. And then once the armor got in and did all the chewing, we got picked up and out.
So you guys were essentially running raids. You'd run in it would be a quick raid essentially.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so you're getting in,
engage, hold, fix and hold.
What was so let's walk back. I mean, you get into country, you said 18, 19 years old when you get to Vietnam, is that right?
I was 18.
18. And so, when you first showed up, what was that like being, because you showed up as an E5, correct? So were you taking over a fire team then, or what were you taking over?
No, actually, when I first got there, I was assigned to that's a hell of a deal in itself. I was assigned to the 4th Infantry Division LURPS in the central part of the country. And we went out of a 90th replacement depot where everybody went. I mean, there were hundreds. And they'd call out your name and they'd go, get on that truck, you're going. And I got on the truck for 4th Infantry. And we didn't clear the gate, and some buck sergeant comes running out with a clipboard. You know those guys. And he goes, there's Sergeant Allendorf on this truck. I said, that's me. He goes, unass it, you're going 11th Cav. I said, what? Anyway, because I had that 11 Delta, they had a scout platoon, which consisted of 6 armored cavalry assault vehicles. The lieutenant had been shot. He had not been replaced. The sergeant, the staff sergeant, platoon sergeant, something happened to him. So they had no NCOs whatsoever, except the track commanders were buck sergeants. But they made me the platoon sergeant of this outfit.
You're a platoon sergeant you showed up?
As an E5, yeah.
Oh my gosh. So just for reference, for those watching, I know Josie, so a platoon sergeant position in standard Army nowadays is like an E7. So this is someone who's probably got, minimum 12 to 14 years in the Army, who's done, and again, as a platoon sergeant, you've pretty much done every role. So you start as a private, maybe you're a rifleman or you're a saw gunner or whatever, maybe you end up on a machine gun team. And then through time, you go to different schools. So now you become a team leader. Then you become a squad leader. Then you become a platoon sergeant because you're overseeing different squads. So for him to go from the training you went to showing up into a war zone and being like, you are now the platoon sergeant, that's insane. It
was insane.
Crazy.
And at that time, a platoon sergeant with that unit was an E6. Fortunately, there was a couple old hands, and I just told them that, and they were nervous, when they saw me. I mean,
I'd be nervous.
I was kind of a baby-faced guy.
Yeah.
And they're like, look, and I just told them, hey, I just got here. I need help. You guys need to train me, and
So like, yeah, from the time you got in to the time, so what was were your main missions then, those raids we were talking about, where so that you guys could fix the enemy while the artillery and...
when I went, yeah, that was probably, you were always ready to go for that. Whether you were, if you had a LERP operation lined up and you were on the op sheet for an insertion and an aircraft went down, that was scrubbed. You went after the aircraft. Mm-hmm. Or if they found a heavy concentration, they wanted to put the whole platoon in, we'd go.
And when you guys were going out, was this, what size element would you like? So let's just say, let's break it down, just because I'm very curious. I honestly don't know as much about the Vietnam conflict as I probably should. And so that's why I want to know, because I look at the way that, like, hearing stories about guys, when you're talking, or things I've heard from other people when they talk about what it would be like and how the fighting in Vietnam was compared to what deployments were like present day with us when we were like in Afghanistan.
Right. And that's something I have no understanding of.
Well, so I never went to Iraq. I never did that. Iraq was much more urban conflict, whereas Afghanistan was very much like rural fighting, Mm-hmm. So it's very rural. It's a lot of like, we would, talk about like Yakima in Washington. We call it Yakistan. That's where we do our training cycles. Mm-hmm. But the scenery and the topography of it was very similar to, a lot of what we would see in Afghanistan. And so, but in Afghanistan, the Ranger Regiment they were doing high value target capture kill missions. Capture kill missions. So again, all raids, but it's also a lot of kinetic strikes, meaning that we were, we'd be in our jock and we'd have, predators flying all over. And the way the war was getting towards the end of it was a lot of just like, why do we need to send in a bunch of guys where guys can get killed and this and that? A lot of times, like, unless we need to capture additional information, let's just blow this guy up. Mm-hmm. And so we would just launch rockets at him with a Predator drone that's just flying around, and this guy never even knows it's coming. And so we weren't out, sometimes I hear the stories of what like guys in Vietnam would do, and I'm like, there's no way that would even get approved anymore, because the risk sounds so astronomically high. And like, the way that wars are fought now, at least in the most recent conflicts, I'm not saying there's not guys who don't do that, but it's, the casualty rate, which I hate to use the word acceptable, but it's so much lower, I think, in present day than when we fought in previous conflicts. So like for you showing up, what were the main mission types you would do? It sounds like the down aircraft recovery, and then just long range patrols?
Pilot recovery, long range patrols, and BDAs, bomb damage assessments.
Yes.
And those were some dicey deals because in the timbered jungle, the triple canopy, which is where a lot of the complexes were set up, just for visual lack of detection, strikes would go in, and sometimes it would be 2 days ahead of us. Other times we'd be in the air circling with 30 guys. The strike would go in and we'd watch the explosions, and we'd insert and sweep, and basically it was mopping up. And we didn't take any prisoners, and we were there looking for intel, paper or maps, anything, and also evaluating the effectiveness of the strike. Most of the time it was bunker complexes, big ones.
How often were you guys running missions?
Those missions?
Just missions in general. Like what was the op tempo?
Pretty constant. It was pretty constant. If you weren't doing something, if you weren't doing this, you were doing that. Mm-hmm. That's the way it was. And of course the pilot rescue, you never knew.
Right.
And we were with an air cav troop. We were stationed right there on the runway with them. And we knew all the pilots and everything. And they meant a lot to us, and if a bird went down, we were snarling and ripping trying to get on the aircraft to go.
And so so after you got into, to Vietnam, once you're in country, how long was it before you were actually going out on like live missions? Was there any train up, or was there anything that you did before?
I went out the day after I got to the scouts with the armored personnel carriers. I went to the Cambodian border with them to secure a Special Forces MedCap, a medical pacification in a village. And we made some contact there. First day assigned.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of cool because I was in the cupola with a 50 caliber, had 260s and a Grenadier. And man, chugging away with that 50, that was heaven.
Laying hate, just lay some hate.
Oh man, it was,
just lay some hate. Yeah. It's
yeah.
I mean, so yeah, that was going to be my next question was like, I remember like when I first showed up to Afghanistan and like the first feelings, like you land the airfield and it's like you don't really know what to expect and you're just kind of like trying to get used and then you see, okay, this is normal, and then like you ramp up and you're seeing like, oh, first missions and just all the things that go through. Like what for yourself was like, so it sounds like that first mission, I mean, went successful, pretty straightforward then. Is that right then?
Yeah, it was. I didn't even know what a med cap was when the order came down. Here I'm supposed to be in charge. I'm asking the old hands. I'm going, hey, what's a med cap?
What was the planning like for that? I mean, because I think too, like with missions and different things that we would do, the planning is so extensive now where
we linked up with the Special Forces people at their camp, and that was about probably a 2-hour roll down a rubber plantation road. And I mean, they were narrow roads, and ambush the rubber plantations were full of bunker complexes. Michelin owned all that country. And we just rolled down the road, and you went like hell. We called it thunder runs. So, you might possibly hit the rear of the track with the mine instead of the front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a...
So here's 6 tracks, and it was blow and go. And I was in the lead track, and I was scared shitless, to tell you the truth.
I believe it, yeah.
And we got there and met up with the Special Forces medics and a few of their other folks, and they kind of briefed us on what they wanted us to do, which was basically just surround the village, and
like cordon off,
secure them.
So for you guys then, I mean, because again, Ranger Regiment, it's very usually, I mean, don't get me wrong, that you definitely can get like, hey, follow on missions or whatever, and we would train up and do all that as well. But for the majority, it's like, we're hitting this compound. This is the plan. This is like, it is planned to a T. Every section of the mission is planned. Here's our primary, alternate, contingency, emergency, like everything
Wasn't like that at all.
Yeah, that's...
No. And it could change. You would have a clear-cut mission, and that could change in an hour based on movement.
So as you were in country then, what was it? So you just kind of fall into this rotation of just, going out on missions on a pretty regular basis. And, I've talked, you see it almost sometimes turns, not casual, that's the wrong word, but like you start to feel like, oh, this is just how things go. And then something doesn't.
You know what? That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I would talk with buddies that I would run into from line infantry units and stuff. And of course, when you're moving a whole company through the jungle, it's a whole different deal.
Yeah.
And it's planned. And there was a clear-cut difference between line infantry and us. Line infantry suffered, The old song, you got to suffer to sing the blues. Well, those guys knew how to sing the blues. We returned after missions to a roof over our head.
Yep. That's the same thing with like present day with the Ranger Regiment. Like our deployments would be, 4.5 months long, very short, but the tempo was high. But then I would talk to my big Army buddies or guys who came from conventional units like the 82nd or, 101st, and they would show up. And I remember talking to one of the guys who was a mortar, and he came from the 82nd, and he was like, yeah, basically when I was in the 82nd, we would just go out in broad daylight, which in the Ranger Regiment, like that almost never happens. Like nowadays it's always at night. So you're under nods, you have advantages, you have air assets, you have, all the best stuff because you're staging like a surgical direct, this is a raid. We are in and out. He's like, oh yeah, we would basically just leave the compound, roll around, wait for someone to shoot at us or try and hit us with a mortar. And then we'd call in helicopters and blow them up and just try and take contact. And I was like, wait, you were trying to get people to shoot at you? He's like, yeah, that was pretty much our game plan every day. I was like, that sounds horrible. In broad daylight? Like, no, that sounds horrible, And so, yeah. But it was the same for us. We would go and then we'd come back,
Yeah. Yeah. And, I realized pretty early on how fortunate, like you said though, we were probably engaged much more than a regular line infantry outfit.
Can you shoot your chair this way just so, yeah, you're good. I just want to make sure the mic and you're still there, but go ahead.
We were probably in contact more often. But once again, it was break contact and get the hell out. Mm-hmm. It was our MO. Whereas a lot of line units, of course it depended on leadership, either go full-blown bananas and keep pushing, which was what was a desired thing. Mm-hmm. But, I look back on that and reading books about, line infantry, that was a miserable existence, digging a new hole every night.
Yep.
Hoping your poncho didn't leak, while you were in the hole, and 2 hours on, 2 hours off on guard. When we were in base, it was cozy.
Yep.
We had it made. We had hot meals. We could get beer.
That's very similar, like with us.
And showers.
Yeah.
We actually had a shower. The water was cold. It was air temperature, but those guys went weeks with nothing but a steel pot full of water to scrub from head to toe.
That's
miserable.
Similar to like when I was in like where, again, don't get me wrong, you sometimes end up pulling your own security and on what's going on, but for a lot of times, depending on where you're at, there would be National Guard guys who were basically responsible for security. And so they would be the ones who are sitting in the towers and 8-hour shifts and just watching. And it was, so when you got back, it's like, oh, if you don't have a mission, you can go to the gym, you can, sit around, hang out, you can, write letters, you can, if you could send an email, if you, can get access to the internet, which since it got easier and easier as the war went on. But like, so there was like a lot of, I don't know, like it was busy, but then it was not, but then I would talk to guys who were just on these crazy outposts in Afghanistan with line units, just living in the suck all the time. Like, oh man, that does not look fun. And it always does kind of put in perspective. It's like, yeah, this kind of sucks, but I could be over there. And that looks a lot worse,
Yeah.
So.
Well, our unit was all volunteers, and a lot of our volunteers came from line units. Mm-hmm. Because we engaged with those guys, we'd mix it up with them. And, I'd tell them, we get a lot of missions and we get a lot of contact, but we get a lot of comfort, comparatively speaking. And those guys would volunteer and come there.
What is, and we were kind of going through before about as far as like, you see things where it's like, oh, everything's normal until it's not. Was there... how were the lessons? I'm sure, like, were you guys doing just after action reports after everything? And how were you gathering those lessons? Because it feels like you'd have to be learning so fast because the consequences are life and death.
Well, I'll tell you, when I took over my team, and this is talk about after action, myself and the team leader, and this was my first LERP, and myself and the team leader are standing in some bamboo, and way out across there's a clearing and there's a tree, and we're just standing there. We're waiting for the aircraft to come get us, and we don't have smoke out yet, but we're there, and we're trying to stay in some kind of concealment, and I hear this boom, and at the same time, the guy, Richard Prattis, he was a team leader. He gets hit in the shoulder with a 51 cal. Spins around so hard, his right hand slapped me and knocked me ass over tea kettle.
Jesus.
And then it was on, and the major who was in the air, he was the air troop commander, he said, "There's a sniper in that tree. I want him out." And I thought, well, shit, they'll put the Cobras on him. They said, "No, go get him held down." So he can't, well, he wasn't held down. He couldn't have got out of that tree in a hurry on a bed. But anyway, we got him. Ships came in, we loaded, well, Prattis was already out. He was medevaced immediately. And we got the sniper and pulled out, and I was a team leader. My first mission.
Jeez.
But I went out, prior to taking my own team out, I went out with other teams with getting education.
And when you were saying taking your team out, what was the size of element that you had on your team? Was this like a standard recce platoon or
No,
recce
typically 5.
Okay, so yeah, it's just a team, a recce
Yeah.
team. Okay, and so you're running around with 5 guys. I remember when I was in recce, our first sergeant pulled us aside as privates, and he goes, "Listen, guys," and he was just very calm, very not like no frills. He's like, I want to have a talk with you. He goes, "This is the most dangerous job in the entire military. It's the most dangerous job." He's like, because you're going to be out and about. You're going to be in small elements that you're not big enough to really fight any size of a force. And you're going to be by yourselves. And there's no guarantee we're getting to you. So he's like, you guys need to understand this is the most dangerous job you could possibly be doing. And I remember going back to that same live fire we were talking about. This conversation happened after that live fire where we were doing some training, because when I went to this live fire, again, I was a new private. I'm trying to fit in. I'm nervous. You've got all the things going on. And so we were breaking contact, and I was just kind of going through the motions. I wasn't like sprinting. I wasn't bounding with everything I had. I wasn't like fighting with I was just kind of like going through the motions. And it wasn't just me, it was a couple of the other new privates, and our first sergeant came over and like literally grabbed us by the scruff and was like, "What the fuck are you guys doing?" Like, sorry for my language, but he was so angry at us. He's like, "Do you not understand? You would be running for your fucking lives right now. What are you doing?" And he's like yelling at us. And I was like, oh shit. He's like, "Think about what you're doing. If you were taking fire right now, it is because you are running for your lives." And I was like, oh shit. And so like it just completely reset the tone of what we were doing that day. Yeah. And it was like one of the best lessons I could learn. It was, again, my first live fire. I learned some key things. I was like, one, always know how to do everything, because it's like what they talk about. Like, you need to train so you know how to do your team leader's job and your squad leader's job, because people get killed. It happens. And so like you may be the most qualified person, as you learned, and that, hey, you're still playing for keeps. Like, just because you were a private and now you have to fulfill the role of a team leader, people die. Like that might happen. And so I learned that really quickly. And then I also was like, so I need to know how to do all this stuff. But then that lesson to me, man, it changed the way I approach my training, because the Army was kind of easy for me because I went in older. I was 26. I turned 26 my first week in basic training. And it wasn't that hard because it was just a lot of like fuck games. I was like, oh, this is easy, like just play around. But like, then when I got to the Ranger Regiment, where people are like, you're going to deploy here very soon. You don't understand what's going on here. That helped me a lot. But like for yourself then, like how did you see the difference between your guys from when you first got into country versus by the time you were leaving? Was the skill level and proficiency just something that was substantially better? Were there lessons that you guys took away that you're like, hey, we need to pass this on to the next guys? Or was it?
Well, we lost a bunch of guys just before I left. And I actually ended up staying to help train
Was that on the mission you were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't have to go into any detail. I mean, but if you want to share any of those guys' stories or what happened there, it sounds like, unfortunately, you walked into a booby trap, an ambush, and like, what happened that day?
Well, the aircraft went down, and we were in the air coming back from a BDA when the aircraft went down. And so we diverted right straight to that. And went in. The pilots were both still alive. I don't know what the number were. I don't think it was a company size. I don't think it was near that. Maybe a platoon of NVA. The Cobras were working them, and the pilots had to get away from the aircraft because of the explosion potential. When it went in, it didn't burn. They got out and got away, and the Cobras were trying to make their runs and keep these guys, and so we needed to get in there, and it was balls to the wall going in. And like I said, we were close with all the pilots. We were friends. We lived with them, and they all meant a lot to us, and they saved our ass, a number of times, getting us out on the run, and. So we got inserted, and we'd probably only been on the run. I mean, not really a dead run, but I mean, trying to be tactical and still move quickly. And I think that had to have been a command detonated. It was a 105 round. And I was pulling drag with my team. And man, I just heard this. I felt the concussion before I heard it. It was just like, boom, my ears hurt, and I was kind of disoriented. And it just blew the hell out of the main body. So I don't know that I answered your question.
No, and you have. I mean, because I think that this is one of those things where going back to everything seems normal until it's not, and it's just like, this is another mission.
And you know what? And that plays into it exactly, is we had not been in contact in probably 2 weeks. And I think that without realizing it, we had become lackadaisical.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of the equation.
How do you, because again, this is another thing I see with younger generation soldiers when you go through loss. And, we were talking before camera about the memorial wall, and, some of these guys who are up here, like, I definitely didn't know all of these guys, but I knew a fair amount of them. It's hard. Like, and I've talked a couple of times about my buddy Ryan, and without going, it's always hard because, Ryan's loss was one of those things where he was just in such a bad spot mentally, and he ended up inadvertently taking his own life. And his last post that he ever put on Facebook was a bottle of Jack, a revolver, and a single bullet. It says, "Who wants to play some Russian roulette tonight?" And he was just going through such a hard time. And I remembered that, and you lose people, and then you're like, for me, it was hard in that, like, they're like, well, the mission is everything. Let's get back up. Let's keep going. Let's, we've still got to be ready to fight. And you almost kind of have to move on from things faster than you want to move on. And it's like, you don't really get a chance to kind of stop and think and just like, holy, like this just happened, And so that was hard. And it took me a while of being out of the Army to like deal with some of that stuff. And I don't know, for me, it's like, there's things that have happened where it's always random things. I was talking with someone recently, and just as we were doing their paperwork, she had the same last name of a friend of mine. It just like hit me kind of hard, of a friend who was killed. And then just other stuff too, where it's just like songs or just random stuff. And it's like, you feel, I don't know, for me, my wife and I have talked about this, where it's like, I'll like break away, because sometimes something will I'll just like start crying. Like, I walk away and I'm just like, I need to get away from people. I don't want people to see me. Like, oh gosh, like, what are they going to think, And so like, It is. What would you say to people though, like who are maybe the younger generation who are looking at going to the military and having been through that and taking such a
That aren't intent on going into?
yeah, that maybe are already there, or because I look at this podcast, I hope is a way where it's like, I always want it to be like, if the younger version of Robert saw this, maybe there's something he could learn. And I think where you started off with, with your drill sergeant Perry and what he's talked about is a great place to kick it off. But I also think that people need to understand, because like, even if you look at the Ranger Creed, recognizing that I volunteered as a Ranger, fully knowing the hazards of my chosen profession, we started there. And I think we say those words. I remember the first time I ever saw the Ranger Creed was when I was in basic training, and I had a guy, his name was Jordan Burns, and he had an option 40 contract, which was to go to the Ranger Regiment, and I had an 18 X-ray contract to go the Special Forces route. And he was writing out the Ranger Creed in basic training. I was like, what are you doing over there? And he's like, oh, I'm writing the Ranger Creed. I was like, what is that? Well, I don't even know what a Ranger is. I was like, what's a Ranger? And he's like, showed me the Ranger Creed. And I remember reading it. I was like, oh, this is badass. Like, this is cool, But like, so the Ranger Creed starts out like, oh, recognizing that volunteer as a Ranger, fully knowing the hazards of my chosen profession. But none of us know the hazards of our chosen profession as a private. Like, none of us expect to walk into things where you're seeing 18 of your friends just get blown up. Like, nobody thinks about these things or knows what to expect. And so like, there's no way you can train for it. I think it's something though that like, we all kind of have our own ways of dealing with it. And it sounds like you've dealt with them both in good ways and poor ways. It sounds like alcohol and just, disassociation was one of the tools you used. What would you say to younger JW, who's, hey, I know you've just gone through this, or maybe this is something, there's no way avoiding it. Like, what would you say to yourself there on like how to have like the intestinal fortitude to continue like with your life and not get to the point where you see so many guys nowadays, just like they call it quits, they kill themselves, and that's the way they approach it,
Well, I think the only way I could look at it is, don't give up. Believe in yourself and your power to overcome experiences. I struggled greatly, and when I went just 2 years ago to the VA in Helena for 2 months, it was, in-house rehab for alcohol and PTSD counseling. And that's when I saw that I had been actually doing some things right. And that was, moving forward, different line of work, but nonetheless, still very dangerous, fighting fire. And most of my time was with the hotshot crews. I went from being a crewman to being a superintendent. And then for a short time, I had my own helicopter, and we flew with 6 men. Initial attack in Southern California, and there were days where we hit 4 fires in a day.
Wow.
And my job was to get in, develop an anchor point where we could hold one piece of the fire for safety reasons, and work around. And as soon as we were in and establishing an anchor point, then the expectation from the higher ups was for me to call in an order. We had what they called the 10 a.m. control policy then, and I was to order enough equipment as the fire boss at that time that we could have the fire fully contained and almost working towards control by 10 a.m. the next morning. So I go, I need 6 engines, I need 2 hotshot crews, 3 dozers, more aircraft, retardant, and that was my job. So we weren't there for a long time. So hotshot crew is a different deal. You were out there till it was done. And we did what they called coyote camps, where they'd sling load food and water and new tools into us. And you didn't have a sleeping bag or anything. You had a little flimsy tin foil, I forget what they call
like
them.
the space blankets?
Yeah. And that was home.
So
Wow.
Let's transition too. So because once you got out of the Army, you came home, I know you said you went and spent about a month just kind of in the wilderness. And then were you saying before off camera that you spent some time just kind of traveling around? And
Oh, that was before I went in the Army.
that was before. Okay.
Yeah. Before I went in the Army, and I was Donna's grandpa who lived with them. I was from the age of 13 until I went in the Army. I hitchhiked all over the place.
That is so nuts. Like, that's just a child to me.
Yeah, no, I did, and you know, my dad, he was glad to see me out of his hair, and so I hitchhiked all over the place. I hitchhiked to. Well, I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I wanted to hitchhike all of Route 66, Winslow, Arizona, and Gallup, New Mexico.
How did you pay for things when you were doing this?
You know what? It didn't take. You could pick up a meal doing labor. You know, just you'd see somebody in a store. Hey, you need a hand? Yeah, I got a couple hours work. I'd do that. But I saved money too. I mowed lawns and washed and waxed cars, and so I had money saved. Unfortunately, when on my trip on Route 66, I didn't have quite enough money saved up. In those days, I don't know if it's still true, but in those days there was what's called a vagrancy charge. If you didn't have enough money for your next meal or several meals, you were a vagrant. And you were likely to break into something, steal something, so you were arrestable. Well, I got rolled in Gallup, New Mexico. If you look at the old Route 66, it makes a straight line through Gallup and then goes out and takes a hard easterly turn. Well, being a smart guy, I had a map, and I went, shit, I can cut through the middle of Gallup down an alley and cut off a lot of walking, you know, because nobody's going to pick you up in town. Yeah. And so I did that, and I was walking down an alley, and there was a couple of Indian guys I thought were drunk in the alley by a dumpster. They weren't drunk. They were waiting for a dumbass. And I walked by, and they jumped me. And the only thing I did right, you had to have $20. I had 20. I had 2 tens, and one was in my shoe, and I had a duffel bag, Army duffel bag, and I had 4 or 5 T-shirts, some underwear and socks, and another pair of Levi's. Well, when I got out the other end of that alley, I was $10 light. I still had the $10 in my shoe. I had no underwear, no T-shirts. All I had basically was an empty duffel bag. But you know, I figured, well, keep going. Anyway, I made it to Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
And how old were you at this time?
Huh?
How old were you?
I was 16.
Okay, so you're just across the country by yourself.
Yeah.
Different time.
Yeah.
Donna's grandpa used to call me Gulliver. Whenever I'd go over there, he'd go, sit down, Gulliver, and tell me about your travels.
What were some of the most interesting things you saw while doing that? Because it's, I feel like this is just a perfect example of how much America's landscape has changed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's unheard of.
Yeah.
Here's the funniest part of the story to me. In Barstow, I got a ride with 2 rodeo cowboys in a Chevy. It wasn't a pickup. It was El Camino. Mm-hmm. You know, it had a pickup bed. Anyway, these guys stopped, and the first thing I saw in there was an ice chest with water dripping out of it. And these guys, these were young cowboys. They literally were cowboys. They were on their way to another rodeo from one they'd just ridden in. And they didn't have their own stock or anything. And so they had small bags in the back and this ice chest. And I was the first guy they picked up. Oh, this is how stupid I was. I went into a place to use a bathroom, a cafe, and the cafes were miles apart. And I come out, and this old guy is sitting in there at the counter. He goes, "You hitchhiking?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You know, it gets damn hot out in that desert." And I said, "Yeah, I know." And he says, "What do you got for a canteen?" I said, I got a thermos. He says, "What, a quart?" I said, "Yeah, a quart." He goes, you know what you need? And he goes in the bathroom, and he comes out, and he's got a big handful of salt tablets. They had those salt tablet machines, or not machines, but you could just get these big pink salt tablets. And he rolled them up in a napkin and gave them to me. He says, take 1 or 2 of these every 2 hours. I thought, well, I did, but geez, because I ran out of water. And I was standing under an overpass when these cowboys picked me up in the shade. And I hopped in, and off we went. And man, these guys were doing like 95. I'm in the back, and they're going, give me another beer. And they'd throw one out, and I'd pass one out. And they'd go, you have one too? Oh, okay. So I'd knock one down. And then we stopped, and this, I swear to God, it was like out of a movie. There was a guy standing there hitchhiking out in the middle of nowhere. And he looked like he had this funny looking little hat, full brimmed hat on, and like a sport coat that didn't fit, and a little leather bag with straps. And we're blowing down the road, and this guy goes, oh, I need to get a hanky or something out of this. And I'm thinking, good luck. Anyway, he opened up his thing, and he had all his stuff was so neatly folded. When the wind caught it, it came out like a box of Kleenex. It was all, and it emptied his entire suitcase, and he was just,
Oh, no.
and I was just going, is this real? I mean, it was like, anyway. But,
I feel like Quentin Tarantino needs to
Yeah.
come over and interview you.
it was like a cartoon. But anyway,
JW, can you
so-
move this way just a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries,
So-
no worries. I just want to make sure we're not missing you.
I make it to,
I'm going to come over and adjust your mic. Go ahead.
what's that?
I'm just going to adjust your mic a little.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go. Perfect.
Anyway, it seemed like every day was a different adventure of some caliber.
I've always wanted to go down Route 66.
What's that?
I said I've always wanted to go down
Oh,
that
it was
route.
cool.
Just
It
go
was cool.
hitchhike it by yourself.
Heck no.
Yeah.
There you go. No, that's the play, obviously.
Yeah. Anyway, I made it to Baton Rouge, and I learned how to say it from the sheriff that took me to jail. It's pouring down rain, and I got no raincoat. I got nothing. It's nighttime, and I'm out there like a dumbass. Sheriff's car pulls up, turns his brights on. I can't see. Guy gets out. He goes, "Come here, boy." I go over there, so I'm not in the lights now. And I'm looking at this guy, and he's got it was like Cool Hand Luke. He had this straw hat on with a plastic cover, and sunglasses, the mirrored sunglasses.
At night?
And he goes, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm not sure." I said, "I'm from California." He goes, "And you don't know where you're going?" I said, "No, I don't, for sure." And he goes, "I'll tell you where." He says, "How old are you?" And I said, 16. He says, 16, huh? He says, "How much money you got?" I said, $10. He says, "You're a vagrant and probably a runaway." I said, "No, I'm not a runaway." And he said, "Well, you hop your ass in my car. You're going to jail until we figure this out." So Baton Rouge is a big place now, but it wasn't as big then. That would have been in 67, 68. Anyway, they had these little like substations where it just had a jail cell and a desk and a bathroom. And, it was like a one bunker.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he takes me in there, and I said, "Well, how long do I have to stay here?" He said, "Till I get a hold of your parents." And he says, "What's your parents' phone number?" And I gave it to him. And he calls, because he's trying to verify I'm not a runaway. He calls, collect. "Well, man, ain't taking the charges."
Yeah.
This went on for 3 days.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and he was pissed at me because he had to go buy me hamburgers and bring them, and I think he was probably buying two, and he was eating one.
So what, you just are hanging out in a jail
I
cell?
just sat on my ass in jail. I had a paperback. I always carried books. Anyway, on the third day, he goes, "I've had enough of this bullshit." He says, "I'm tired of looking at you." And he called my dad on their dime
Nice.
in the evening. My dad answered the phone, and pretty soon he's sitting up in his chair and he's going, "Yeah, oh, yeah? He looks at me and he goes, yeah, I can kind of see that. And I'm going, what the hell? Finally, he hangs up and he goes, well, you're a free man. He says, your old man told me you're not a runaway. I said, oh, good.
Oh, good.
And I said,
Good.
I said, so what was all the conversation about? And he says, well, you know, maybe I shouldn't let you go just yet because your old man told me that if I kept you and paid close attention, I'd get a hell of an education because you're the smartest son of a bitch in the whole world. And you know everything.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, that was kind of a fun deal. And he wasn't a bad guy.
Yeah.
You know, he was. But
Yeah, that would happen plus
Pardon me?
more. I said that would happen plus more these days if they picked up a 16-year-old kid on the road.
Oh yeah. Now
That's
CPS
like-
would be involved.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
it's
there's
like,
no.
that's pretty chill
oh yeah,
to me.
no, there was no shakes at all.
That's good.
So man, that's. I'm sure. Is there any other like stories that you can just think of when you're on the road that you're like, you know what, this would be a good thing to share, or just something funny that you're like, hey, this is something interesting that happened to me while I was hitchhiking. Anything that you think of? Because those ones, and if not, those were. That's just.
You know, that was probably one of the ride with the Cowboys and getting picked up in Baton Rouge. I asked the guy, I said, where the hell are we? And he goes, we're in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, boy.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So after you got out of the military, then you get back, and you were talking about how a friend of yours basically was the one who got you to come and start fighting fires. You had
Yeah.
a friend who invited
Yeah.
you for that. So tell us about that, because you ended up working for the Forest Service for basically the rest of your career. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
long were you with the Forest Service for?
I started in 71.
Okay.
And that was seasonal, and that was a hell of a deal because Donna and I were married. She was pregnant. And that's a whole different story itself, the way we ended up married.
Tell us. If go for it.
okay,
Yeah,
well,
let's hear it.
Donna's mom, she never made any bones about the fact that Donna could do far better than she chose. And you know, I mean, I respected her mom. Millie, I called her Godzilla.
So much respect.
Not to her face.
So much respect. Yeah.
But when I referred to her to buddies, I mentioned Godzilla. They knew who I was talking about. She was a loud, hot-tempered Italian woman, and she didn't like me, and she didn't make any bones about it. Anyway, so after I had settled out and I was working, before I went to work for the Forest Service, I told her, I said, you know, Millie, I'm going to marry your daughter. I asked her, and she said yes. And this was over the phone. She says, when you're off work, you need to come by the house and talk to me. I said, okay. I said, I'd prefer that Coke was there, her husband, also. She says, no, Coke doesn't need to be here. And she was kind of the head boss in that family. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I showed up. I worked graveyards, so I just gotten off. And I got a ride to I had a little apartment above a topless bar in town.
Okay. Some more stories there.
Well, it worked out good because
I bet it did.
The music. no. I mean, the music wasn't playing while I was trying to sleep.
Yeah.
You know, because I was sleeping in the daytime.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, $70 a month, all utilities, beautiful place. Not beautiful, but I mean, had everything. Anyway, and it was haunted and Donna will swear to it. She was there when water started coming on and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, so I go to Donna's folks' house, and Donna was away at school in Sacramento. And I said, what do you want to talk about, Millie? And she goes, well, would you like a beer? She said, I think you ought to have a beer. And I said, yeah, I'd love a beer. She goes, I'm going to pour you a shot, too, because I think you're going to need that. And I'm going,
Okay.
This is going to get good. Anyway, so I knocked down my shot, and I was sipping on my beer, and she says, I just want you to know that there is no way in hell I will allow you to marry my daughter in the Catholic Church. And we were both Catholics, although her far more than me.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I said, well, I understand. And I said, I'm good with that. She said, what do you mean you're good with that? I said, I'm going to marry your daughter. Not in the church. I'm good with that. Anyway, so that was kind of where it ended. And I finished my beer and left. And then years later, like 12 years later, we're in the town where our folks live, Lompoc. And they invite Donna and I to go out to dinner with them to the Elks Club. They were Elks Club members. And they're gathered with all these friends of theirs whose children we went to high school with. And it's a big, long table. And there's a lady sitting next to me. Donna's sitting to my right. And directly across from us is Millie and Coke, Donna's dad. And everybody's chattering away, and they're talking about the kids getting married and having kids and all this stuff. And the lady next to me, it gets kind of quiet, and she goes, John, I don't remember coming to you and Donna's wedding. And I said, no, you wouldn't. She says, well, when did you get married? And I told her. She says, here in Lompoc? And I said, no. I said, Millie wouldn't allow me to marry Donna in the Catholic Church. So we went to the Chapel of High Hopes in Reno, Nevada. That wasn't really the name of it, but that's what I said. Mm-hmm. And you could have heard a pin drop. It was incredible. And Millie was sitting over there, and her eyes were crushed. I was like, oh, it was the funniest damn thing. I can remember it to this day.
Got your revenge, threw her under the bus.
Yep.
There you go.
Karma rides a slow horse.
Yeah. My wife and I, because both of us had been married before we met each other. And so when we started looking at how we wanted to get married, we purposefully didn't invite any of our family. We didn't tell them we were doing it. And we just, when we were in Vegas, eloped, went through a drive-through thing and got married in the drive-through. And Lincoln was not an accident. We decided to have Lincoln before we were married, which I know is not the traditional answer, but we were just, we're like, hey, we've both been down this route. We love each other. We, wanted to have a son or wanted to have a kid, but we kind of just always knew like it was going to be Lincoln. Like we would talk about him.
That's cool.
And so he was the only person there. So we have a photo of us where we're like both holding up our rings, sitting in a car, and then Lincoln's just like 3 months old, sitting in the back, and so that was our wedding. That was it, just a little, drive through in Las Vegas. So now once you and Donna then, so you got married, you start going in the Forest Service, and did you go straight to a hotshot crew, or what did that look like for you?
No, I spent 2 years on an engine, and the first year I was working, there was a fire in Ojai, California, and we were the closest engine. We were there and laying hose, and that thing was running away from us up this hill. I mean, it was going. And another engine came in, so there's a total of 10 people on the fire, and it's going like crazy. Long about midnight, we had to put our headlamps on. We were cutting fire line and laying hoses. We went through real dense brush, and the foreman said, everybody get down to the road and get your headlamps on and prepare for a long night. And just as I was getting my headlamp strapped onto my hard hat, in pulls a bus from this way, and in pulls another bus. One says, Los Prietos Hot Shots, Santa Barbara. The other one says, Texas Canyon, Angeles National Forest. And I'm going, Hot Shots? Who the hell are these guys? I never heard of them before. Anyway, so I'm just kind of, these guys got off like in military formation, lined out. They marched by the tail end of the trucks, carried they had a tool bin. First things out are the saws, the gas, and the shafts. Then the hand tools, Pulaski's, everything. And I'm going, holy shit. This looks like some good shit. And it was amazing because that fire was like halfway up the hill and burning in a big U, just with a point. And these crews both take a flank, fire up the saws. And I'm just watching. I can see their headlamps, and we're still squirting water down below. I'm feeling pretty useless. These guys are getting after it. I'm going, holy shit. In about 4 hours, maybe 5, it was before the sun came up, they had that thing corralled. They got around the head of it. And I asked my foreman, Ed Moody, he was an old coot, but he was a hard-working guy. I says, hey, what's the deal with these hotshot crews? He goes, oh, boy, you don't want nothing to do with that shit. And I said, no, I think I do. Anyway, so that was it. And then I applied for the Santa Barbara crew because they were the ones that had the best rep. There was only 8 hotshot crews in the United States.
Mind moving a little closer to the mic. Sorry. There you go.
There was only 8 hotshot crews in the United States then.
Wow.
Yeah, now there's well over 100.
So, and tell me, because I'm not very familiar with how the Forest Service works or what, what different teams do. So what is the goal of a hotshot team? What is their role?
Hotshot crew is build fire line, backfire, and contain it. That is their goal.
What does the team look like, and what's the size of
20 men.
20. So what? I know nothing about fighting fire.
Yeah.
So for someone like myself, who's like the lay person, what does a day look like when it's like, okay, we have this fire? How would a hotshot team be employed, and what are they doing?
Every day starts with PT. Every day. And if you show up hungover, laying on the side of the road, puking your guts up, you're going to finish that run if you got to crawl. Mm-hmm. That's the way it is. And some of the runs were up hills through the brush where we had established trails. Others were along the road. Anyway, the day starts with PT. The horn blows. You load up, and you're always busy because you're sharpening tools, reconditioning tools. We were doing LP hotshots. We were the test crew for fire line explosives. Where you could blow fire line with, you lay it out like hose and feed out of a box, and then you had a detonator for it. Anyway, that was another thing. So we were always training. We all had to get certified as fire line blasters, and first aid, safety training. I mean, if you weren't physically working on something, you were in the classroom. And best training I ever got was with the hotshot crews. And we did other, like Santa Barbara, they put a huge fuel break in across the ridgetop to protect Oprah Winfrey's house and all the other rich people. And
must be nice.
Yeah. Anyway, we'd be out there, we worked 10-hour days, and we'd be out there for 9.5 hours, but we did do PT fitted somewhere in the day. Mm-hmm. And you didn't run in tennis shoes, you ran in your boots. And now they test and everything in their tennis shoes, but it wasn't that way then. In fact, we didn't even wear Nomex. We wore Frisco jeans. They were cotton logger pants, and just a J.C. Penney khaki shirt.
Jeez.
Yeah, there was no Nomex or any safety equipment like that. Hard hat, goggles, headlamp, gloves.
That's what you got. So and then how long were you on a hotshot crew? Like, what does the progression look like? Is it something where you're on a team and then you take over a team, or what does that look like?
Well, no, it doesn't work that way exactly. You don't just take over a team because there's not that many hotshot crews. And it's a position that a lot of guys sought, because, the Forest Service, if you looked at regular fire departments, like I turned down a job with LA City, I tested with them, but it was all in the city, and I would have had to live in LA. I'll stay with the hotshots. It was fun. Mm-hmm. It was fun, and you traveled all the time, and it was exciting, sometimes to the point of scaring the living hell out of you, but it was fun. And so I stayed on the hotshot crew for Santa Barbara hotshots for 4 years. And then they had an engine at Refugio Station, which was close to where I lived, and I could get there like in 10 minutes from where we lived. And so they asked me if I wanted that job as a captain there, so I took it. And it was a deal because the guy that had been there before me, he was a slacker. I mean, a slacker. When I got there, I told these guys, okay, here's the way it works. 0900 on the PT pad. They go, we don't do PT. I go, well, yes, we do. And I mean, these guys were laying around scratching their ass, swatting flies. And I said, no, we're going to be on the fuel break after PT every morning. So most of them quit. I hired a whole new crew.
And sometimes.
So that was the first step. I worked there for a couple of years, and then the helicopter, they call it the helishots. That job came open, the captain job, and I got that job. And then after that, there was a crew, still is a crew, the Reading Hotshots. It's strictly a training crew. And a lot of the guys had never been on a hotshot crew in their life. They're professional foresters and logging systems management and all this kind of these are a wide array of people, and half of them have no clue what they're getting into. But it was highly desirable because you got all the upper echelon training. And you were number one priority for any dispatch in the United States. So you went to Hawaii, you went to Alaska,
Wow.
You went everywhere. We started to Australia and got turned around. And so I spent a year on that crew. And that was a real feather in your hat, to have been on the crew. And frankly, I was kind of surprised when I applied that I got the job, but the superintendent that I worked for in Santa Barbara, he had worked with Charlie Caldwell, the superintendent at Reading, and he pushed me, said, yeah, so that's how I got that job.
So for the average person who's never fought a fire, what's it like when that's happening? And is it?
Well, in my day, there were no hour limitations. Nowadays, they have length of shift restrictions, days out restrictions. We would go out and literally we would build line until we could get to a safe enough spot where the superintendent felt we could get a couple hours sleep. And he'd go, okay, break a bean, eat, C ration, and grab a nap. And he'd stay up normally. And we'd eat a sea rat, and God, I can remember waking up down in San Bernardino in some of those steep, brushy hill country like that, rock piles. And I remember my buddy Bungwad, we called him, because he was always going, hey man, you got any Bungwad? I got to take a crap. And all of his T-shirts had a big thing cut out with his knife, and nobody gave him any Bungwad because he was always bombing everybody's.
This guy never get away from it.
Anyway, it was funny as hell. But I can remember waking up and I look and here's Bungwad, and he's bent over his can of fruitcake and he's sound asleep. He hasn't eaten a bite. He never even got the fruitcake out of the can. He fell asleep. And then I'm looking at him and I'm trying to find somebody. We had little Instamatic cameras. I go, hey, give me your camera. Let me get a picture, And I hear this guy scream further up. Well, he had taken his boots off and he put his foot on, and there was a scorpion in his boot. So, it was there was always something.
Yeah.
It was just crazy. It was fun. It was fun, and we took a lot of pride. The last thing in the world you wanted was for anybody to cut more line than you, or have the fire cross on line you cut. That was unforgivable.
What is the process of cutting, when you're talking about cutting line, what does that entail? So they drop you off, to me, I don't even know what those words mean.
You can be dropped. A lot of it we were helicoptered in. Other times it was roadside. We could drive right to it, park the bus, and go. But you start out with a chainsaw, and 2 chainsaws up front, and 2 swampers. Saws cutting, the guys are throwing, because you had to get rid of that stuff so you didn't stack up more flammables. And then comes Pulaski's, which is an axe with a grub end, digging out the cut stobs. If they were too big, you had to dig them out so they didn't catch fire. And then shovels and clouds to clean it down to mineral soil. And the rule of thumb was 1.5 times dirt to the height of the fuel. So if you had 6-foot fuel, you had 1.5 times 6 wide on the ground and overhead fuel. So it's heavy duty physical work. And in those days, our shifts, like I said, there was no shift limitation. In fact, when I first started, you didn't even get overtime because the Fair Labor Standards Act was not yet passed. And then all of a sudden that happened and we got overtime. We were, holy shit.
We're rich.
Yeah. And we got paid for working on Sundays. We got 25% more, Sunday diff, they called it, and night differential, another 25% if you were working nights. So, it was, but the whole thing, really, the whole thing to a good hotshot crew is cohesion amongst each other. Take care of each other. I mean, you're constantly jabbing and jibbing and, giving each other shit. But when it comes down to it, you're one unit, one being, 20 heads.
Yeah. And how long did you work for the Forest Service before you retired?
About 37 years.
Okay, so wow, you did for quite some time. And then now, I mean, and in that, I know we haven't talked a ton. So you have how many kids again?
2 daughters.
2 daughters, okay.
Yep.
And they're grown grandkids or?
2 grandkids.
Okay, awesome.
A boy and a girl.
So do they both have kids?
No, the youngest one has never married. She's had a lot of long-term boyfriends, but she's a workaholic. And I think that's been a problem for her. She finally has met a guy that I just love. This guy, he is just great. And I have never seen her so happy in her life.
So you got your fingers crossed on this one?
Yeah, I really do. He's a great, great guy. I love him dearly. In fact, I call and talk to him. I don't even talk to my daughter.
That's how it is for my wife and I. My birthday was earlier this month on the 4th, so it was a Saturday. And I heard my wife talking for a long time. I was like, oh, were you talking to your mom? She's like, no, I was talking to your mom. I was like, my mom called you on my birthday before she called me. And she's like, I think she loves me more. I'm like, probably, but.
Yeah. No, I'm really, really fortunate. I have a great relationship with both my daughters. They're both, they're like any kid, they're going to try and I should talk. They're going to do things their way. Well, we came to understanding at an early age how the cow eats the cabbage and who the lead cow is. And they're both, I couldn't be prouder of them.
That's awesome.
And my oldest girl, who's with us now, she'll be at the Ranger breakfast.
Nice.
She's the one with children. And my grandson, we're going to his graduation on the 12th of June. He's graduating with a degree in forestry and fire engineering.
Wow.
But he wants to be an airline pilot. I told him, he said, but I want to do something fun too.
Yeah.
And my granddaughter, she's going to Colorado State University in Boulder.
Okay.
And she's in some kind of an energy engineering type focus. They're both good students and hard workers. My grandson was he gave up his position, but he made the Olympic team for 28 for bicycle racing.
Wow.
Yeah. He's raced internationally all over the world.
Wow, that's
and his goal ever since he was a little kid, his dad used to race for the Bosch bicycle team. Graham raced for a couple of different teams, and I couldn't believe, they'd have these delivery vehicles pull up and unload these $20,000 bicycles, and I'd be going, whoa, who's paying for that? He goes, oh, the team buys it. He hasn't bought a bike in 15 years.
Yeah.
And his dad built an actual bicycle shop in their garage. And I mean, it's all about bikes. There's like 12 different bikes hanging on the walls because he races mountain bikes and so does his sister. Anyway, amazing kid to me. Both of them are. But no, and back to my youngest girl. She was, when I was working law enforcement in the Emerald Triangle of Humboldt County to Trinity and Mendocino, she got introduced to a number of buddies of mine from DEA that I worked with, and she went with us on a search warrant and arrest. She had to stay back till we were done, but she was with us while we were doing all the stuff. So she ended up, unbeknownst to me, I did not realize when she went to college, I thought she always has been a good-hearted person and wanted to do good things for others. She was majoring in sociology, and so I thought that was that. Well, we got a surprise at her graduation. It turned out she majored also in criminology. She got a double major. And so my buddy, Casey Smith, who headed up the DEA in San Francisco and had met Charisse on search warrants and stuff, he tried to recruit her in on a student entry program. Mm-hmm. And DEA, man, their grade scale is good. So I figured, I told Charisse, I said, man, if you're going to go to work as any kind of a cop, you want to do it with these guys because you'll be able to live comfortably. Anyway, they offered her the job, and she said, no, I got my heart set on being so she ended up in CPS, of all places in Sacramento. And I mean, and she wrestled. Unbeknownst to her mom, I got her into wrestling. She wanted to wrestle. She was the first girl in California to wrestle.
Wow.
Yeah, that was back in the early 90s. And her first year, she never won a match. And the coach called and says, hey, I hope you and Donna are coming with Charisse to the awards ceremony. I said, oh, I didn't know there was one. Charisse didn't mention. He goes, oh, yeah, we have something for Charisse. Anyway, they gave her an award, the Timex Award, for taking a licking and keeping on ticking. And so
how did she receive that?
She was thrilled.
Okay, she loved it. She was like, all right, I'm going to keep coming back, boys.
Oh, she did. She did. And, I mean, it was a hell of a time getting her on the team. First, the coach was urging her when he saw her playing basketball, come out for wrestling. And then when it happened, everything changed. And I ended up meeting with the athletic director and all of them. And I asked him, I says, how familiar are you fellows with Title IX? And they went, what? And I said, Coach so-and-so here, he's been telling her he wants her to come out, and now you're saying she can't because she's a girl? I said, this shit ain't going to fly with me. And anyway, she was on the team, and she really excelled in her following years because it came down to the fact that she was the only left-handed person on the team, and the coaches were all right-handed, and so they couldn't properly teach her takedowns and all of that kind of thing. So she goes, hey, Dad, I've been saving my money from McDonald's. Would you split halvers if I go to a wrestling camp for 2 weeks? And I said, you bet.
Yeah.
So I drove her up to Lake Tahoe, and she was up there for camp. And we're driving home, and she was all puffed up, full of herself. I said, so, tell me something, Charisse. You going to kick ass this year? Did you learn anything? She says, there's a rest stop up here. Why don't you pull over and we'll get out on the lawn. I'll show you.
I love the enthusiasm. Love the enthusiasm.
I can still remember it. Anyway, so, yeah, they're both good kids.
That's great. I look with Lincoln because, we both do jiu-jitsu, and jiu-jitsu it's come so far where there's a lot of wrestling in jiu-jitsu now as well. You have to be a good wrestler if you want to be good at jiu-jitsu. And so, but I tell all these other parents because a lot of the parents don't train. Like they just take their kids, and I'm like, you're taking your young men to these classes. I was like, if you don't start training soon, your son, by the time he's 14, is not you won't be able to discipline him physically because he'll be like, what are you going to do? You're going to smack me? Like, yeah, all right. Like if you have a kid who wants to act up, like he'll be able to ragdoll you. And so, but that's why with Lincoln, I'm always like, I'm going to keep training that way.
Yeah.
Hey, it's going to take, I know that day will come, but
Sure it will.
it's going to be a ways down the road.
Oh,
But,
yeah.
he's getting to the spot where he's getting so competitive and he's starting to get like, super lean and like he's growing a little bit. And so
He's losing that baby face.
yeah. Oh yeah. He's becoming
Yeah.
a young man. And,
Yeah.
it's fun to watch these kids as they
yeah.
as they're rolling with each other because they get after it and like they get heated sometimes. And so you'll watch like 2 8-year-old kids like go on a war path against each other.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, oh man, like, whoa, let's calm down guys. It's all right. But like trying to encourage that.
Yeah,
too.
this ain't just rolling around on the lawn now.
Oh yeah, it heats up, and so a lot of it too, though, is encouraging that though for giving kids an outlet where it's okay to be aggressive, it's okay to be like a man, it's okay to like want to win, and just giving them that because in jiu-jitsu there's no hiding. It's not like in a team sport where if the team's good you can still win. It's like nope, it's
Individual.
Yep, it's you versus them, and the person who's better, not always, but most often will win. And so there's just no hiding. There's no hiding from the hard work. And it's just kind of obvious the kids who put the time in, the kids who don't, and so getting them to see that, But well, I do want to finish up too with just, so now you've done all these. You've had a very interesting. You mentioned being in law enforcement. I didn't even know you were. When did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
That happened in the Forest Service. They had the Forest Service, unbeknownst to a lot of people, has always had armed officers from 1905 through. But it was very low profile, and what brought it to a higher level was drugs in California.
Yeah.
Meth labs and marijuana grows and that kind of thing. And when I first moved to the Mendocino National Forest, which is right in the heart of the Emerald Triangle, they called it, I was a pretty avid bird hunter, and I had a damn good bird dog. And I would go out quail hunting out in the middle of nowhere and get run out at gunpoint by growers that were guarding their crop. And it pissed me off. And I went to the ranger and I said, this is bullshit. I said, this is national forest. Anybody in the public can be out there. And I said, in my case, I had enough sense to turn around and walk away. I said, not everybody would do that. These people are a threat to the people that own the forest, and something needs to happen. And the ranger gets a big smile. He goes, so, JW, I guess you just volunteered to go to the law enforcement academy. I said, you serious? And he said, yeah. I said, bet your ass. So packed up and went to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and where everybody trains except FBI and DEA, U.S. Marshals, everybody's there. Anyway, I went there. I think it was 14 weeks or something like that. Graduated, then I had to go through a field training officer period where I worked side by side with an officer. In this case, I worked with the Lake County Sheriff's Department, who I knew a lot of the deputies anyway. And they offered me a job when I finished my training. And I said, no, I got too much time with the outfit. Even though it would have been fun, it was a good department. And so that's how I got in. But at that time, I was what they called a collateral duty officer. I was an engine captain, and I guess I was a battalion chief at that time. But I was a fire employee and law enforcement. And so I kept I had a gun safe at work with all my gear and everything. And if I was in a truck out by myself or with the crew, I had at least a sidearm, ballistic vest, and necessary gear. But it was fun as hell because I raised hell with those dope growers. I was all over those guys like a cheap suit. In fact, when I came, and Lake County, this was another interesting thing that made it fun. Lake County was a parole release point for Folsom and San Quentin. So all their families were there, And with a hardcore ex-con comes a jive-ass punk kid, not to mention the ex-cons. And so from my house, I could look across the lake and I could see 2 roads going up into the woods. And I'd be out there about 9 o'clock and I'd go, oh. And these guys would be driving real slow because they'd be smoking dope. And what they were doing was going up where they thought nobody would catch them to shoot up. And I didn't go for a while. I just let them keep going. And I could pinpoint where they were stopping on the ridgetop. And I went out, and it was Forest Service campgrounds, and I'd find their straps, their rubber bands, and their IVs, or needles and stuff. And so I got a hold of the sheriff's department. I said, hey, we got a turkey shoot going out here, if you guys want to join me. And they did. And so I would go up darked out in my patrol. I had a 4-wheel drive, and the sheriffs would come in underneath me, and it was all heavy brush coming off the ridgetop, and I'd come rolling into the campground. There'd be 3 or 4 of the jamokes sitting on a picnic table. And I'd turn on the lights, and man, it'd be assholes and elbows going off into the brush. And the sheriff's department, they'd be snagging them because you can't stay in that brush long, especially if you're screwed up. Anyway, so did a lot of cleanup. A lot of guys went back to San Quentin.
Jeez. No, I mean, it kind of goes back to like what you opened up with, where you're talking about like, making sure that you're willing to take a stand in a time of moral crisis. And it seems like throughout your life, like, from
every
the
career.
Army, to, fighting fires, to then, like you said, I guess you just volunteered to be, in law enforcement. It seems like that's kind of a ongoing thing. And even the same thing with your daughter, when you were talking about, her with being able to wrestle. It's like, hey, this is the time of, again, all these different moral crises that you've kind of faced. And
well, that all came from Sergeant Perry, and it never left my mind.
Yeah. Is that my watch? Whose is that? Is that your watch? Beeping? Oh, okay. I was like, what was that? I was just like, make sure.
Is it beeping?
Yeah.
I can't hear it.
That's all right. No worries.
Oh, that's not
So, and let's just kind of, just wrapping up too, because I want to finish up. I know we've talked about Donna a little bit here and there, and obviously it sounds like she's been such a huge influence. And now that you're in this new stage of, not new, but I know you've been retired. When did you retire? What year?
I've been April Fool's Day. I was retired 20 years.
Okay, so you've been retired for a while. So I'd like to hear just kind of, because what we were talking about even off camera is I'm hoping people see that to live a successful life doesn't mean you have to make $1 billion, because by all intents and purposes, if someone looked at the life you've lived and said, here's just followed everything from a young man who, was hitchhiking across the nation by himself and seeing all these different things, to a man who has, been in the Army and has gone to war and has seen both the highs and lows of that, to then coming back and having, long-term career, long-term spouse, family members who are still, who still love you, still want to be around you. Like, it's a successful life. Like, people would be like, man, this is great, because there's a lot of people, I think, in today's day and age where it's just like people don't stay in the same job. They don't stay married. They don't have relationships with their kids down the road. What would you say now on this final, like, being retired stage of your, of your life? How has that been? And what are some of the lessons you've taken away from that?
Oh, man. Well, first, retirement was very iffy. I had my retirement papers in with personnel, unbeknownst to anyone, including Donna. I didn't talk about it. I just made up my mind that this is a time. I walked down to the personnel office, which used to be on Broadway in the federal building. Yeah. Walked down to the personnel office. I said, and I worked with these gals because I did hiring and everything through them, recruiting. And I said, would you mind putting together a retirement package for me? Because I'm going to pull the pin. I went, what? And I said, yeah. And they said, when? And I said, April Fool's Day. And they went, JW, in your position, that's not right. You can't do that. I said, no. I said, I think you'll find out. If you go through my jacket carefully, you'll find out it's perfect timing. because I had like 3-4 suspension proposals. I beat every one of them. And so I thought, April Fool's it is. Anyway, so they were processing that. In the meantime, and it was only going to take like a month. We were only about 2 months out total. About a month into them putting my package together, the phone rings. I had purloined a United States Coast Guard boat through the federal supply system. When things become excess property, they can go to other agencies. And strangely enough, top priority is another federal agency gets first pick at anything. In this case, it was a 44-foot Coast Guard rescue boat, twin diesels, valued at $1.2 million, plus a spare engine. Well, I was working in Humboldt County then, and they have a offshore responsibility there. But they had a 21-foot boat. I went out with them once with all my ballistic vest and all that shit, and I was going, oh man, I'm taking this thing off because it's nasty. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so my buddy, Phil, he stops by my office one Saturday morning. He goes, hey, take a look at this. I said, what about it? And he says, well, it's up for grabs. He said, you could get it. I said, what? He says, yeah, and I called the Coast Guard, and Venezuela has Debs on it. And I said, Venezuela? I said, those bastards are enemies. And they want our boat? And he goes, yeah. And I said, bullshit. Anyway, I dummied up all this paperwork and told him I was the such and such, and all. It was all bullshit. And filed it, and Coast Guard goes, it's yours.
Wow.
I mean, it took about 2 weeks for them to do all the paperwork. They called me up. They go, there's an issue here. And I said, what's that? And they said, transportation. This boat is at Columbia Bar in Oregon, and it can't be staffed and brought down there by Coast Guard personnel. It has to come by truck. And I'm going, oh, my God. She says, we can arrange that, but it'll have to be paid for. And I said, okay, go ahead and do that. Well, the personnel officer on the forest, he was a dirtbag, and he had been sexually harassing a bunch of young women, and he had his own little slush fund that I knew about that he was paying off claims. So I used that to pay for $16,000 to have that boat brought from.
Unbeknownst to him, I'm imagining.
Huh?
Unbeknownst to him, he had no idea.
No idea.
That's funny.
No idea. Anyway, he got an idea after the 2 months out when it came in.
Yeah.
And he was afraid to bring it out. He said, I know what you did. And I said, and I know what you did. And nobody even knows you have that management code. For what reason, Tony? Anyway, so, because he was harassing these young women, and they would file a complaint and pay him off.
There goes karma again, coming right back at him.
Yeah, anyway, so I used his money to transport it. Everything was going great until I was on days off, and I was mowing the lawn. Donna comes out, and she goes, hey, John, Phil Dostal says, you got to talk to him right now. I go, okay, so I shut the mower off, went in. So what's going on? He goes, you got the news on? I said, no, I'm mowing the lawn. He said, turn the news on. He says, there's going to be some shit over this. I said, what? I turned the news on. The boat coming down Highway 101, heavily traveled, got to an overpass that it couldn't clear.
Oh, no.
So they had to shut down Highway 101 both ways, back this truck up almost a mile to get around. And I'm watching TV, and there's a CHP captain who I worked with, the sheriff who the boat's going to, and the newscaster goes, well, Sheriff Lewis, we understand this is a new boat for your department. He goes, that's correct. He says, JW Allendorf with the U.S. Forest Service has gotten this boat for us, and it's been a long-awaited need filled. And I'm going, oh, my God. Luckily, my boss was in Reading, And so, anyway, I buried the paperwork. Retirement day comes. I'm like 2 weeks out. My phone rings, and it's some bean counter from Washington. And she reads me the riot act. And I said, you know what, I'm just about to retire. She said, you're retiring without a pension. She said, there's no way you're going out on this deal. She said, you're probably going to get jail time. I mean, it was a serious deal. $2 million. Anyway, so the chief of the Forest Service, I mean, the head mofo, catches wind of this. The director of law enforcement, the head mofo for us in Washington, I have a conference call with them, and they go, you know what? We're going to have a conference call with this because personnel wants to file termination and loss of retirement. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And I've not told Donna any of this because she'd worry herself to death. Anyway, so we have a conference call with my boss, his boss, the boss's boss, all these bosses. And finally the chief goes, you know what? He says, I have reviewed Allendorf's training package. And I'm here to say that this is a lack of training. I looked at, he has a $50,000 credit card limit, and he has never been trained in the use of that credit card, nor has it ever been abused. And he said, Allendorf is not going to be punished in any way for a lack of training on our part. He said, this is dead and over, and that boat belongs to Humboldt County Sheriff's Department.
Wow.
I'm going, thank you, Lord.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank God.
Yeah. Oh, man, that was a dandy deal.
And then, so since then, like, what have you, and now being retired, I mean, is it something as far as like, what would you say? Because I know just as we wrap up, like, I think sometimes people look at retirement as like an event, but you've been retired now for 20 years, it sounds like. And so how would you tell people, like, as far as the way they plan, like, you know, to get to retirement, but then once you're there, like, how have you made it something that's been fulfilling?
One thing I would tell anybody, regardless of their age, if they're still looking at retiring, and I've been...
Would you mind scooting just a little closer to the mic again? Thank you.
Through the years, I've been badly beat up on the fire line and had some major injuries and surgeries and things. And I would tell them, take care of your body. Take care of your body so you can enjoy your retirement. When I first retired, I enjoyed shit. I was fishing here, fishing there, hiking here and everything. You know, I got a reconstructed foot with 5 dead people bones. It's got artificial joints and plates everywhere, and it's slowing me down. But I still had a good time, and I'm planning on having more good times. But that would be my advice. Don't leave your job if you can't leave proud. Be proud of what you've done.
That's really good.
I like that, yeah.
If you have any doubts, one thing that I always felt was important was if you see a problem, make a positive change. And that could cost you in your career. It put me up against the wall several times in my effort to make a change, but I succeeded, and it became accepted. You can't go through your life kissing ass just for the next grade level or, the boss nodding at you. Sometimes you got to take them on. And I did that a number of times. And I was scared, but there's times when the bosses need to know that you guys are fucked up. And you need to tell them.
Yeah.
And I did that a number of times with my poor wife. She'd go, you said what to him?
Hearing you tell your story, I can see why Donna's so cautious. Because, like, if I wasn't cautious, JW would just be living by the seat of his pants all the time.
That's exactly true. It is true, without a doubt. I would probably, because I was happy-go-lucky, spend it like you got it. Shit, if it wasn't for Donna, I wouldn't have a pot to piss in.
Yeah. That's how you know you found the right one then. Well, I mean, shoot, we've been going. I was looking at this for over 2 hours now. Is there anything that you'd like to finish or anything you'd like to say as far as, and I know we didn't really get to talk a lot about, your Sergeant Perry here. It sounds like he had just such a big impact on you. And what do you think about him was it that made him so impactful to you? And maybe what are some of those, if you want to leave people with like key takeaways, if they're trying to be a good leader and they're trying to have a positive impact, whether it's someone they work with or in the military or a child, like what was it about him that was such a positive role for you?
What? Sergeant Perry, he was like a blinking light of integrity and leadership. And it just stood out in him. I mean, I was 17 years old and I was looking at this man, and here's this black man with his shiny face, and a little pug nose, and he made me shave for the first time. I never shaved. And he came up and he laid the brim of his hat on the rim of my nose, and he went, "Allendorf, you are a total shame." I said, "Yes, Sergeant." He says, "Do you know why?" I said, "No, Sergeant." He says, "You get your ass up those metal stairs in the low crawl position to the 3rd floor where your razor is unused and shave." I never needed to shave. I never used a razor. I said, "Yes, Sergeant." We all had one, because you had to. I went up there and shaved, came back down, and I'm standing there. He steps up, and Christ, there was blood running down my cheeks and stuff, and everybody's in the front leaning rest position wanting to kill me. And he goes, "Allendorf, you are something I will never forget." I said, "Yes, Sergeant." He says, "Do you know why?" And I said, "No, Sergeant." He says, "You look like you failed to shave, but you were up there sorting bobcats on an assembly line." And I mean, the guy he was just, squared away. And I found out later, he was a real hero. I mean, like 3 Silver Stars.
Wow.
Distinguished Service Cross. DACTO, 173rd. Nastiest piece of ground the Army had in Vietnam.
Jeez.
2 tours there, came back, ended up retiring as the Command Sergeant Major of Fort Ord.
Wow.
Yeah. He was an E6 when I met him. And then I found out from a fellow that was at Fort Ord, he says, he was always checking on you. I said, "You're kidding me." He says, "No, he followed you." He said he was proud of you. He said when you went to recondo school, he was happy as a clam.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Sweet.
Anyway, but, be proud of what you do it right, and don't be afraid to make change. Change is necessary. And what he said there, hottest places in hell are reserved for those who refuse to take a stand in times of moral crisis. If you refuse, you're a coward.
I love that. That's so powerful and something that I think right now, especially with the state of the world.
When you sent me that message, I was just out where my gun cleaning thing is, and I have that framed right there, and I said, "I got it."
There it is. That's perfect. I love it. And man, I think this has been just so much fun hearing your story, and I'm sure I can't wait. I can't wait to like get this out. And I know we have the crew of guys over at the Ranger Breakfast, and just that's the one thing I really like about that breakfast is you get to hear people's stories. Never to this degree, which has been great. But I remember because, when we first met each other years and years ago, just at the coffee shop.
Yep. I remember that. You had your laptop.
Yeah, that was back before I had an office, when I was just trying to get things up and going. And I used the little City Brew as my impromptu office. And I remember you had, just a alert pad with a Ranger scroll. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go talk to this guy. And then the way that the world works, and Missoula being a small town, we reconnected again at the Ranger Breakfast. And it's just, I'm so grateful for that group of guys because it has been a place where it's nice to just talk with people. And maybe it's from different generations, but everyone knows kind of who everyone is, even though we're all different. We all have our own personalities. It's like we've all kind of been through this similar version of
things in common.
Yeah.
And it's like Steve Barry. I was in Costco buying some dog food, and I had that hat on, and he walked by me with a Ranger hat with Vanessa, and then he spun around. He comes back. He goes, "Ranger." I said, "No, I'm not a Ranger. I'm not a tabbed Ranger." He goes, LERP? I said, yep. And he goes, good enough for me.
That counts. Yeah, the LERP units. That's you guys kind of set the stage, I think, for everything, and just again that to me is scary. Like that type of conflict is scary, and I just have so much respect for you and just for people laying the groundwork. But well, JW, I appreciate you coming on.
Well, I appreciate it. It's been a fun trip down memory lane, to tell you the truth.
I'm glad. I'm really glad. And I think this stuff is important because it's just like there's so much that I think in today's day and age, we're also rushing to get from point to point to point. And there's so much that can be learned just by talking to people and just hearing their stories. And, especially when it's led to a very successful life like you've had. So we really appreciate you coming on.
And, once again, I got to credit my little Polish plum.
Yeah.
She's made my life possible.
It seems like from the start she really has.
Honestly, and I didn't say this earlier, but I think it's very possible she may have saved my life when I first came home. She was my hope. So
that's incredible. Well, we appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. Well, JW, thanks for coming on.